March 24, 1998, early morning somewhere in the Caribbean. A 23-year-old woman steps out of her cruise cabin. Her belongings stay behind shoes, cigarettes ID untouched. Security cameras are running. The hallway is lit. Her family is just meters away. And yet, she's gone. Not missing from a city or an airport, but from a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by thousands of people. What kind of force makes someone disappear from a place where everyone's supposed to be watching? Before we go further, pause for a second. If this story already feels wrong to you, leave a comment that says, "For Amy." Her parents never stopped searching. Maybe someone out there still knows something, and maybe, just maybe, your voice is the one that reaches her. The trip was supposed to be a family celebration. Ron and Iva Bradley had planned it months in advance, a vacation before real life took over. Their daughter Amy had just graduated from college and was preparing to start a new job. Their son, Brad Younger, was excited to spend time together. It was a chance to breathe, to reconnect, to make memories. The cruise ship they boarded, Rhapsody of the Seas, owned by Royal Caribbean, wasn't just large. It was floating luxury. Pools, casinos, clubs, endless food, tropical ports of call. Thousands of passengers, hundreds of staff. A contained world designed for pleasure and comfort. And on the surface, everything went according to plan. Photos from the first day show smiles, cocktail sunlight. Amy is laughing with her brother, posing on deck, wearing sunglasses, holding a drink. She looked relaxed, confident, present. But underneath the joy, something else was happening. From the first night, Amy's mother noticed it. The way certain men crew members looked at Amy. Not playful glances, not admiration, just something else. Long stares, faces that didn't smile, eyes that didn't blink. Iva would later describe it as uncomfortable from the beginning. Amy noticed it too. She told her brother Brad about it, in passing brushed it off with a joke. But she was the type to sense danger early. She'd worked as a lifeguard, played competitive sports. She read people well. She wasn't naive. So why didn't she leave the dance club that night? Why didn't she stay in the cabin? Or maybe the better question is, why did she have to? March 23rd, the second full night on board. After a formal dinner with the family, Amy and Brad went to the ship's dance club. There was live Caribbean music. The atmosphere was loud, colorful, and full of life. One of the band members, a man known only by his nickname Yellow, seemed friendly enough. He played bass, smiled at guests, danced with Amy, just once or twice. Other passengers noticed him. He stood out maybe because he wanted to. Amy danced, had a drink, laughed with her brother. They returned to their cabin together around 3:30 a.m. Brad fell asleep quickly. Amy stayed awake. At some point, she stepped out onto the balcony or the hallway, maybe for a smoke. She wasn't upset. She wasn't crying. She left everything behind her: shoes, ID, cigarettes, lighter, even the clothes she'd worn earlier. The cabin door was closed. Nothing was broken. There were no signs of distress, no sound, no knock, no call for help. At 6:00 a.m., their father Ron woke up. Amy's bed was still empty. At first, they searched the deck. Maybe she was watching the sunrise. Maybe she went to grab coffee. But no one had seen her. Not in the dining areas, not on the pool deck, not in the gym. She wasn't anywhere. She hadn't checked out. She hadn't left a note. And she hadn't taken a single thing with her. The family went to the ship's staff. They asked for help. They begged for an announcement, a lockdown, a head count, anything. But the crew hesitated. They said she was probably just off exploring. Maybe she'd gotten off at port, but the ship hadn't docked yet. No one had left. They said it wasn't their policy to disturb the guests, and so the ship kept moving. While Amy's parents pleaded with staff to start searching, the first crucial hours slipped away. This was a cruise ship with security cameras, restricted access, and a limited number of places a person could go. But somehow, within just a few hours, a healthy 23-year-old woman had vanished inside it. Not lost, not drunk, not accidentally fallen overboard. Vanished. And if someone else had a hand in it, if this wasn't a mistake but a plan, then that means someone on board knew exactly what they were doing. So the question now isn't just where did Amy go, it's who made sure she wouldn't be found. The first day was supposed to begin with sunlight and coffee. Instead, it began with a search. Lynn Bradley stood on the deck of Rhapsody of the Seas, staring out at the water. It was early, still quiet. He walked to the pool, checked the jogging track, peeked into the lounge. Amy wasn't there. Back at the cabin, her bed was untouched, her shoes still by the door, her lighter still on the counter, her ID and cigarettes still untouched. He told himself maybe she'd gone out for sunrise. Maybe she found a friend. Maybe she was exploring the upper decks. But that feeling in his stomach, it didn't go away. And when her mother Iva went searching too, when she too came back shaking her head, that was the moment the panic began to settle in. They went to the ship's staff. They explained everything, how Amy had stepped out in the early hours, how she hadn't come back, how nothing of hers was missing. They asked for an announcement, a call over the intercom, a visual search, anything. But the crew hesitated. They said it was too early, that she was an adult, that maybe she was sleeping it off somewhere. That explanation didn't sit right with the Bradleys. Their daughter wasn't careless. She wouldn't wander off without her shoes or ID, and she certainly wouldn't vanish without a word. They asked the ship to hold passengers before docking at Curaçao. The crew said they couldn't delay disembarkation for one person. That was when Iva Bradley's voice broke. She pleaded, face-flushed voice, cracking, "If my daughter was your daughter, wouldn't you search every room?" But the ship had its schedule, and within hours passengers were stepping onto land. If someone had taken Amy off that ship, they were already gone. A few hours later, the crew did a cursory sweep. They walked through the common areas, asked a few questions. There was no lockdown, no full announcement, just routine motions. It was the Bradleys, her parents and brother, who searched every deck. They knocked on cabin doors, asked strangers to look at Amy's photo, checked stairwells and storage closets. One woman remembered seeing Amy at the club the night before. Another recalled her dancing with the bass player from the ship's band. Brad remembered him too, a man named Yellow, tall, muscular, always watching. There had been something off about him, the way he stayed close, the way his eyes followed Amy, even when she wasn't dancing. By the time the FBI arrived days later, the ship had already sailed again. The investigation moved slowly. The FBI questioned staff, reviewed security footage, tried to recreate a timeline. But with each passing hour, memories faded and traces blurred. One lead did stand out. A Canadian passenger came forward with a strange story. He swore he saw a woman matching Amy's description walking along the beach in Curaçao. She wasn't alone. Two local men walked with her. She looked nervous, afraid. He didn't say anything. At the time, assumed it was none of his business. But when he saw Amy's face on the news back home, his heart dropped. By the time he contacted authorities, it had already been too long. The beach was empty. The woman was gone. The Bradleys stayed in Curaçao as long as they could. They handed out flyers, spoke to locals, searched hostels and ports. Amy's brother Brad flew back home alone. The parents couldn't bring themselves to leave without her. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then a new lead emerged. A U.S. Navy petty officer claimed he saw Amy in a Caribbean brothel. He said she looked frightened, that she begged him for help, that she introduced herself by name, Amy Lynn Bradley, but he was undercover at the time and couldn't intervene. He didn't report it right away. By the time he returned with backup, the building had burned down, and again the trail ended there. Over the years, more sightings surfaced. A woman at a Barbados hotel, another at a shopping mall. Each time she was with a man, each time she seemed anxious, uncomfortable, silent. One tip included a photo, an anonymous email. The woman in the picture was older, heavier, tired, but the eyes looked familiar. She sat on a bed dressed in lingerie, staring blankly at the camera. The photo had been posted on a now-defunct adult site. The FBI examined it. So did the Bradleys. Some experts believed it was Amy. But there was no metadata, no IP address, just pixels and pain. If Amy had been abducted, it wasn't random. It was deliberate, silent, precise. A cruise ship has cameras, guards, locked doors, yet someone had managed to slip past all of it with a living person. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't confusion, and by now the Bradleys knew it was more than just a disappearance. It was the beginning of something darker. Human trafficking, a phrase no parent ever wants to hear. But the signs pointed there. A young American woman, healthy, attractive, educated, disappeared without a trace. Sightings in red light districts, foreign beaches, escort sites, always being moved, always watched, never free. And despite the passage of time, despite the pain, Amy's parents never gave up. They sold their home. They hired private investigators. They chased every lead. They put up a $250,000 reward. They even appeared on TV shows begging the public for help. Because for them, Amy wasn't a case file. She was their daughter, still out there, still waiting, still hoping someone, somewhere, would finally speak up. If she really is out there, who's keeping her hidden, and how much longer will silence win? It started like any other morning on a cruise ship. The sun rose over Curaçao. Vacationers stepped off the gangway sunglasses on ready for beach days and fruity drinks. Crew members smiled, cameras flashed, music played. But Amy's family wasn't heading to shore. They were pacing the corridors of Deck 9. By now, they had searched everywhere: the breakfast buffet, the casino, the gym, the pool. They had knocked on doors, asked strangers, checked stairwells, even looked overboard. Amy was still missing. Her cabin looked untouched. Her shoes, cigarettes, lighter, and ID were still there. Her bed was made. Her makeup case was closed. Ron, her father, tried to stay calm. Maybe she just got lost in the shuffle. Maybe she stepped outside for air. But every new minute made those thoughts harder to believe. Amy wasn't the kind of person to wander off without telling someone. And then came the security footage. After repeated requests and hours of waiting, the cruise staff finally let them see a snippet, one clip. No explanation for why more wasn't available, just this one. It showed Amy in the hallway around 5:30 a.m. She was walking calmly toward the elevator. She looked alert, awake, like someone out for a short walk. The camera caught her from behind, then she turned a corner. A few seconds later, someone else appeared. A man. He moved slower with deliberate steps. His face wasn't fully clear in the grainy footage, but his body language was sharp. He wasn't heading somewhere. He was following. Amy's family asked who he was. The staff said they didn't know, but when they pushed harder, the answers became vague. "We'll look into it. We don't have access to all the footage right now. It could be anyone." Eva, Amy's mom, felt her chest tighten. Back in the common areas, things grew stranger. A crew member, a woman from the housekeeping team, pulled Iva aside later that day. Her voice was low. She looked nervous. "I think I saw your daughter that morning," she said, "near the elevator." She looked scared. Eva grabbed her hand. "Where? What time? What did she say?" The woman looked around, then stepped back. "I'm sorry. I was told not to speak about it." And then she walked away. Brad, Amy's younger brother, began remembering things too. Small moments that didn't seem like much the night before, but now felt heavy. Amy had spent a lot of time around the ship's band. One man in particular, Alistair Douglas, who went by Yellow. He was tall, muscular, and always seemed to be nearby, not just while performing, even when they were off stage. He'd show up near the pool, the bar, the hallways. Brad remembered how Yellow always kept an eye on Amy. There was a moment just a few hours before she vanished when Amy leaned into Brad and said something strange. "I don't trust him," she said. "He gives me the creeps." She didn't smile when she said it. Later that evening, after the ship had already docked and hundreds of people had come and gone, another crew member approached Ron quietly. He asked if Amy was okay, said he'd heard she was missing. Then he said something that stuck with Ron forever. "She didn't seem like herself last night." "What do you mean?" Ron asked. The man hesitated. She looked like she was being watched. The Bradleys wanted the ship to hold passengers for questioning. Just a few hours, just until the search was done. But the crew said that wasn't possible. People had already disembarked. The schedule couldn't change. It was too late. If someone had taken Amy, if she had been lured or forced off that ship, they were already long gone. That's when the theories began. What if Amy hadn't fallen? What if she hadn't run away? What if someone on board had planned this? Someone who knew the ship's routines, the blind spots in security, the quiet hallways, the doors that didn't lock properly, the cabins that were temporarily empty. Someone who had access. Someone who had been watching her. Maybe even more than one person. In the days that followed, small stories started to surface. One guest claimed he'd seen Amy talking to a man at the bar who wasn't a fellow passenger. When asked who, he said, "I assumed he was crew." He wore a white shirt and slacks, but he wasn't smiling. Another said she saw Amy crying in a stairwell earlier that night. But when she walked closer, Amy quickly wiped her face and forced a smile. Then there was the bartender who swore Amy had ordered a drink but didn't drink it. She left it untouched, as if she was distracted. When FBI agents finally joined the case days after the ship had docked, they faced an uphill climb. Too many people had come and gone. Too many memories were fading. Too many hands had touched the evidence. The security tapes, most of them had already been taped over. The guest list, hundreds of names, no fingerprints, no logs of who was where at what time. All the FBI had were fragments. A hallway clip, a nervous housekeeper, a watchful crew member, a family's growing fear. Then, weeks later, something new. A Canadian tourist called in. He'd seen Amy's photo on TV and froze. He said he had seen a woman who looked exactly like her walking on the beach in Curaçao the same morning the ship docked. She was with two men. They were local, he thought, dressed casually, one of them smoking. The woman walked between them, stiff and quiet. She looked scared, he said. I thought they were arguing, so I kept walking. He hadn't realized it was a disappearance until he was back home watching the news. By then it was too late. No hotel check-ins, no camera footage, no confirmed sightings since. It was beginning to look less like a tragic accident and more like a calculated removal. Not a moment of chaos, but a series of decisions, quiet ones, intentional. Someone followed Amy. Someone watched her dance. Someone waited until 5:30 in the morning when the halls were empty, when her family was asleep, when the ship was waking up but not yet alert. And then just like that, she was gone. What if this wasn't random? What if someone on that ship had been grooming her, not just for attention, but for something else? What if they knew exactly where she'd be and when? And what if the plan had always been to make her disappear before the rest of the world ever opened their eyes? It was almost a year after Amy disappeared when the phone rang. The man on the line didn't sound like a crank caller. He was calm, direct. His voice, though steady, carried something urgent. He introduced himself as a U.S. Navy petty officer. He had been stationed in Curaçao, the same island where the cruise had docked that morning. Amy vanished. And then he said something that made Amy's father freeze. "I saw your daughter," he told Ron Bradley, "in a brothel." Ron's breath caught. "You're sure?" I sat down. She approached me. She looked nervous, out of place. She said, "My name is Amy Bradley. I need help." Ron gripped the phone tighter. Before he could ask more, the man explained. He didn't know who she was at the time. He thought maybe she was being dramatic. But after returning home, he saw a segment on the news. He recognized her face instantly. The Navy man went to his superiors. He filed a report. He told the FBI. But weeks had already passed. The trail was cold. Still, Ron and Iva felt something shift. For the first time, they had a lead that pointed to something chilling. Maybe Amy was alive, but she wasn't free. Over the next few years, more tips began to trickle in. Some sounded far-fetched, others were strangely specific. One came from a Canadian woman on vacation in Barbados. She had stopped at a roadside restroom just off the highway. Inside, she saw a young woman come in accompanied by two men. The woman seemed anxious. She didn't speak. She barely looked up. But as the men stood guard outside the door, the young woman leaned toward her. "My name is Amy," she whispered. "I'm from Virginia." Then the men called her and she left. The witness didn't realize what she had seen until days later when she returned home and recognized Amy's photo in a missing persons segment. She contacted authorities, But there were no cameras at the stop, no names, no license plates, just another vanishing shadow. Then came the photograph. In 2005, the Bradleys received an email from a former military official working with an organization that tracked human trafficking. Attached was a photo. It showed a young woman lying on a bed wearing heavy makeup. Her hair styled her face, staring straight at the camera. She wasn't smiling. Her body looked stiff posed. The photo came from an escort website. The woman went by the name Jas. But to Ron and Iva there was no doubt. It was Amy. They recognized her eyes, the shape of her jaw. Even the curve of her shoulder matched the tattoos. Amy had a Tasmanian devil, a sun on her back, a gecko on her navel. The FBI was notified. Investigators looked into it, but they couldn't trace the website. It had already been shut down. The servers were gone. The trail was cut. Still, that image haunted the Bradleys. What if their daughter had been taken and sold? Experts began weighing in. A former FBI agent who specialized in human trafficking said that cruise ships were a blind spot in international law. They floated between countries rarely held accountable to a single government. Crew members came from dozens of nations. Background checks were inconsistent, and the ports, many, were surrounded by underground industries, prostitution, drugs, violence. The theory went like this. Amy had been approached by someone on the ship, someone who had watched her, who knew her schedule, maybe even pretended to be a friend. She had been lured or threatened, and when the ship docked in Curacao, she was already gone, taken before the rest of the passengers stepped off. By the time her family raised the alarm, she had disappeared into a network designed to erase people. There were more signs. Other passengers remembered seeing Amy talking to certain crew members who left the ship shortly after she vanished. One of them, the same man she had danced with the night before, Alistair Yellow Douglas. He denied involvement, but he also admitted to seeing her early that morning near the elevators. Why didn't he say anything then? Why had security footage been erased? Why did the crew resist searching the ship right away? So many questions, so few answers. The Bradleys kept pushing. They hired private investigators. They traveled to islands. They knocked on doors. At one point, they even received a postcard with a tip, a drawing of a building, and a note that said, "She's here." They followed every one of them. Ron went to Curacao personally. He searched bars and clubs. At night, he walked the streets hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He carried a stack of her photos everywhere. No one could tell him where she was. But more than once, someone looked at her photo and said, "She was here." Through it all, the question remained, why Amy? She was smart, strong, cautious. She didn't take unnecessary risks. She didn't drink heavily. She wasn't naive. But she was beautiful, athletic, independent, and traveling in a floating city full of strangers. To those who prey on others, she might have looked like the perfect target. Years passed. The sightings slowed. The news coverage faded. But her parents never stopped searching. They kept her room just the way it was. Her college books still sat on the shelf. Her favorite green jacket still hung in the closet. Sometimes Eva said she could still hear Amy's laughter in the house. And sometimes she swore she dreamed of her. A beach, a crowded room, a locked door. Amy looking back, not with fear, but with pleading eyes. Is it possible she's still alive? Trapped in a place where she's no longer allowed to speak, where asking for help once was the only chance she had, and no one listened fast enough. What would you do if your daughter whispered her name and then vanished into the noise? Would you stop looking? Because the Bradleys haven't. Not after 26 years, not after silence, not after every door that slammed shut. They still believe. Amy's not gone. She's waiting. After the cruise docked and passengers filed off, the Bradley family didn't go home. Ron and Iva stayed in Curacao for 5 days, walking the shoreline where the ship had been anchored. They asked strangers if they'd seen a girl with green eyes and short brown hair. They showed photos at hotels, gas stations, ferry docks. Nothing felt real. Their daughter had vanished without a sound from a floating city surrounded by thousands of people, and no one could tell them how or why. When they finally flew back to Virginia, they came home with Amy's bags, but not Amy. Her room was untouched, her shoes still by the door, her shampoo still in the shower. Ron walked into her room and sat down on the edge of the bed. He couldn't explain it, but it felt like she'd just stepped out for a moment and might return at any time. So they left the light on, just in case. Weeks turned into months. Eva set a place for Amy at the dinner table, then quietly took it away. On Amy's birthday, they bought a cake. They didn't light candles. Her younger brother, Brad, avoided the room entirely. For years, he didn't speak much about the cruise. In every interview, his voice would tremble when he mentioned that he had danced with Amy the night before. "If I had just gone up to check on her in the morning," he once said, "things might have been different." Everyone in the family carried a question they couldn't answer. The house filled with boxes, tips, reports, emails from strangers. People claimed to have seen Amy in Venezuela, Costa Rica, the Bahamas. Some offered blurry photos or vague directions. Others told lies for attention. But the Bradleys followed every lead. Ron flew back to the Caribbean more than once. He met with local authorities, investigators, even former criminals who said they could help. He wandered streets, watched cruise ships dock, and waited for someone who looked familiar. "I kept hoping to hear my name in the crowd," he said. Just once. In 2005, the family received a photograph from a private investigator monitoring a sex trafficking website. It showed a young woman on a bed, staring blankly at the camera. The lighting was harsh, her posture stiff. She wore heavy makeup and an expression that didn't belong to her. But her eyes were unmistakable. They compared the curve of the eyebrows, the shape of her nose, the tattoos, one on the ankle, one on the shoulder blade. All matched. The FBI investigated, but the website was already down. Servers deleted. The photo, despite everything it revealed, became another dead end. And yet, Ron and Iva printed it, framed it, kept it on the desk next to their phone. Not because they wanted to remember Amy that way, because they needed proof she might still be out there. Years passed, public interest waned, other stories came and went. But the Bradleys kept searching. They hired artists to age her face digitally. What would Amy look like at 28, at 34, at 40? They updated missing persons posters, created a website, made videos, put her name in every press release, every podcast that would listen. They offered a $250,000 reward. One time they got an anonymous postcard with only 5 words, "She's on the island. Come now." Ron flew down that same week, but the address led nowhere. People often asked, why not give up? The answer was never complicated. "She's our daughter," Iva said. "If there's a 1% chance, that's enough." Ron echoed her, "We're not looking for closure. We're looking for Amy." There were nights Iva would sleep with her hand resting on the phone, hoping it might ring with a voice on the other end, saying, "Mom." And every time a new tip arrived, even if it sounded ridiculous, they still checked. Hope didn't leave them. It changed shape. It grew quieter, deeper, but it stayed. By 2010, the cruise line had long moved on. They offered condolences but never accepted blame. Crew logs had gaps. Surveillance tapes were lost. No one could explain why the ship wasn't locked down when Amy was first reported missing. No one admitted seeing her leave. To this day, not a single crew member has been charged or held accountable in relation to Amy's case. That's what haunts the family most, not just the disappearance, but the silence afterward. Every so often, reporters would call, a new documentary, another anniversary. And the Bradleys would say yes. Not because they liked reopening wounds, but because maybe the right person was still out there. Someone who saw something, someone who heard a name, remembered a face, had a story they never thought mattered. It only takes one witness to crack a mystery, one voice to echo back to her. In a rare moment, Ron once spoke directly to Amy through the camera. He said, "If you can hear me, Amy, I never stopped looking, and I never will. We'll bring you home, somehow." Today, Amy Lynn Bradley has been missing for over 26 years. She would be 50 years old. Her face remains on missing persons bulletins. Her family still responds to every call. Every time the phone rings, they brace themselves, just in case. Because in a world of vanishing signals, of people taken and forgotten, of stories replaced by headlines and silence, one family still believes, still hopes, still waits. If you've listened this far, leave a comment that says, "Still looking," for Amy, for her family, for anyone who disappears without a trace and whose name still deserves to be spoken. There are stories that begin with a disappearance and never truly end. Amy Lynn Bradley's name is still on missing persons bulletins. Her photo still circulates on forums, in true crime groups, in quiet corners of the internet, where strangers keep looking for someone they've never met. Every year around the time she vanished, her family still lights a small candle, not because it will bring her home, but because it reminds them that she existed, that she matters, that someone somewhere might still remember her face. The world moved on. Cruise lines advertised new destinations. Families booked vacations. The ship that carried Amy vanished into company mergers and fresh coats of paint. But the Bradleys didn't forget. They kept Amy's room exactly as she left it, her favorite books on the shelf, her earrings still on the dresser, the kind of stillness that feels like waiting, not like absence. Their old dog used to curl up outside her door even long after she disappeared. When he passed, they buried him with her blanket, just in case. The mailbox still brings letters, tips, stories, sometimes cruel hoaxes, sometimes faint glimmers of hope. Once someone wrote just 3 words, "She's still here." They don't know if it was a prank or something else, but they added it to the box with everything else. Because in a world that stopped listening, even the faintest whisper matters. What do you do when your child disappears into silence? Some families build memorials. Others move to escape the weight of unanswered questions. Ron and Iva chose a different kind of grief. They turned it into motion. They called, they searched, they stood in front of cameras and begged. Not for justice, for a chance, for one more clue, for a moment to bring their daughter home. They've aged. The lines on their faces are deeper now, their steps slower, but they still speak about Amy in the present tense. Because to speak of her in the past would mean accepting something they never saw, never confirmed, never believed. She didn't fade. She didn't vanish from memory. She lives in the space between what we know and what we hope. And sometimes that's enough. Maybe Amy is still out there. Maybe she's waiting for someone to say her name in just the right place at just the right moment. Maybe that's how these stories shift, not with headlines, but with echoes. Because when we say their names, we pull them a little closer to the surface. We remind the world that they existed, that they mattered, that they were loved. If you've stayed with us this far, you've done something powerful. You've listened, not just to the mystery, but to the ache behind it. The ache of a family that refused to stop hoping even when hope got quiet. You've kept a name alive, and for many that means everything. So tonight, when the world gets still, say her name. Amy, not as a victim, not as a case file, but as someone who danced barefoot the night before she vanished, who loved sunrises, who planned to start a new job when she got home, who hugged her brother before she went to sleep, who never stopped being someone's daughter. If someone you loved disappeared, would you still talk about them, even when the world has moved on? Ron and Iva Bradley did, and they still do. If this story touched you, leave a comment that says, "For Amy," for the families who never stopped, because some names never fade, not if we keep speaking them.